On behalf of the Professional Baseball Strength and Conditioning Coaches Society, I'd like to welcome you to the PBSCCS Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Messina.
All right, everybody, today's episode of the podcast is going to be another group episode. I'll have the guys introduce themselves and then we'll get in. So we'll go Brad first, Jordan second, just name, position in the org, and anything relevant on your path, and then we'll get into it.
Hi, my name is Brad Scott. I'm the head strength conditioning coach for the Atlanta Braves. I'm going into my 7th season as the Major League Strength and Conditioning coach, and have been in the field for, I think this is my 23rd year. So thank you for having us, and we're excited to be on and kind of share our insights.
Yeah, I'm Jordan Sidwell. I'm the minor league strength and conditioning coordinator here. This will be my 2nd year in this role and my 5th year with the Braves overall.
So today's theme obviously is going to be the World Series champion Atlanta Braves. So first and foremost, congrats to both of you being in leadership positions, high-level positions in a successful organization is really cool. And I'm super happy for both of you guys. And just kind of going over like what makes your staff click, how you keep things in line, and how things work throughout the org for you guys is kind of how I want to go about this today. So first question for you guys is, what do you think helped most to lead you to that ultimate success that you had this year? And then maybe particularly like strength and conditioning practices or like how you keep your staff involved. Just what do you think helped the most this year?
Honestly, I think it's just, we have really good people, and that's throughout the entire organization. I think our staff is very talented and we just click very well as a strength and conditioning staff, but also in conjunction with our medical staff, with our analytics, with our player development, with our front office. So I think everybody is working closely together and no question is off limits. And so I think that's really kind of brought us together as a staff. And then that ultimately bleeds down to the players and keeping athletes centered at the forefront of our minds and working collectively as a group, whether it's return to play, whether that's, monitoring and kind of seeing what the game is presented, and how we can kind of read what the game has presented and then kind of like develop a game plan for each player within our organization. So I think that's kind of from the major league side of it. And honestly, like it's so multifactorial, we also had a lot of luck. Let's be honest. It's a big part of it.
Yeah, and kind of departmentally throughout the system this year, I think one thing that kind of reared its head in the postseason was we had some guys that were put in really important situations in the playoffs and in the World Series even, and guys that maybe weren't on the Major League roster the whole year and didn't know until they were out there that they were going to be called upon in big situations. And in situations like that, and Chris, I'm sure you've been in this experience, having been in AAA before, I think we did a really good job this year of having some good continuity between guys in the big leagues and guys that are in AAA, and having guys throughout the org that could communicate between the big leagues and minor leagues, so that, again, when a guy's getting called upon in like literally the biggest moment you could possibly have in your career, everyone's on the same page with, okay, where he's at in his routine, like what he's going to need leading up to a game. And there's nothing lost in the shuffle between guys being in the big leagues, being in the minor leagues, and so on and so forth. And I imagine we'll probably get to it later, kind of talking about our philosophy and how maybe the department runs that might be different from some others. But the one thing that I think holds us together the most, regardless of whether we think identically or not, is that our communication across levels in the minor leagues and then from minor leagues to big leagues is going to be really good. And I think this year that reflected itself, in which, again, we came up in the biggest possible positions you could have on field, where there were guys that our AAA coach, Paul Howie, was keeping them going when they weren't always in the big leagues, and letting the big league staff know when they got, called upon, like what they needed to know to keep that guy going. And it's not too often that you have those kinds of situations line up with some of the most critical times of the year baseball wise. So I think that communication across levels and then between big league and minor leagues is something that we did really well this year.
Yeah, and I know Paul too, and he's a really good guy. And I think I want to get to those points too, Jordan, in a second, but, you know, going back to Brad's about just having good people, I think that really goes a long way. We're hiring a bunch of new positions now, and some of them are just seasonal. And I keep telling them, I just want somebody that at the end of a 10 or a 12-hour day in spring training, I can sit in the office and talk with and like actually enjoy talking with you. I can teach you our system. We can teach you our system. That's kind of our job. But like, if you're a good person, we can mold you into a good coach. Where I think sometimes you find people who are really good coaches, but they just don't play well with others, and they actually probably cause rifts. Like, is that something you've seen throughout your staff also?
Yeah, I think like when you go to hire somebody, like what is the character of the person, and how do we kind of figure out what's their character first? What do they like and dislike, and how do they operate, and kind of what is their North Star, and how do we kind of align who they are and check their references, and then how does that kind of fit into the rest of our particular staff? You know, to your point, right? Like you can teach somebody the skills that is necessary to be successful, but if they're not a good person, or don't get along well with others, they're probably not going to get along well with the players as well, you know, and that's a really important thing. So it's definitely on the forefront of what we're looking for and when we're checking backgrounds and references and trying to put a team together.
Yeah, I feel the same way, Chris. You mentioned being at the end of a spring training day. Like, is it someone that you still want to sit down at the end of all that when you're exhausted and just talk shop with or hang out with, and not have it feel forced? And I felt, you know, over the last couple of years here that's a spot that we are in, and we're going to continue to try to keep it that way. That everyone who's coming in, regardless of whether at the lowest level of the minor leagues or up to the big leagues, again, like we try to enjoy each other's company even when that company isn't forced. And I think if you've got that going on, it makes the work more enjoyable and makes us all more productive. So I definitely feel you've been talking about having those grindy days, and at the end of it all, just still enjoying the people you're working with.
I think one thing I reflect back at like this particular year, you know, like 2020 was kind of an interesting year for everybody. And this spring training, you know, you're working a 12-hour day, and then we're throwing the aerobia around and playing fungo golf as a staff and getting the athletic trainers involved. And everyone's just like, cool, it's the end of the day. Like, we had fun. And I think that's a really big component of keeping the staff upbeat on those dog days. It's like, we can have a lot of fun training athletes because we have a really fun job, you know, and we got to know like, hey, we got to put on our business hat and we got to be really good coaches. And that allows that kind of freedom and that trust as well. I think good staffs are made up of good people, and good people trust each other. And that comes from good character and good makeup.
I really love that. I really do. And like, one of the things for me, I've always really enjoyed spring training, one, because of the consistency of the schedule and everything, but two, because you're all together as a staff, right? That's the only time in the year that all of your staff is together in one room. And then the off season, everybody lives somewhere, you know, different. And then during the season, you kind of get on your island and you get busy and you don't always connect. So it's something that I'm going to actively, for us, try to push this year of like, even if it's a short Zoom once a month, just getting on just to reconnect with everybody. Because for me, I really do love just that connection aspect of spring training where we're all together. And like you said, when you have good people and you enjoy the company without forcing it, like we're the same way. We'll go out and throw the football around on the agility field at the end of a long day. And it's just good bonding. And I think when you do that, the staff gets on the same page, and then you create that continuity throughout your staff, and the players see that too. So that kind of leads me into my next thought here is like, do you guys have a universal strength and conditioning philosophy throughout the system? And like, how much autonomy are you giving coaches level to level throughout your system?
In terms of our overall philosophy, I think, you know, if we had to put it down on paper, you know, like, are we looking from long-term development? Are we developing kind of earlier what we had spoken about, like a consistency of training of routines for these guys? You know, you kind of look at like, what is your block zero program? Are we just getting really, really good at the basics and continuing that? Are we continuing to educate all of those within the organization, from front office down to the players, of the benefits of the strength and conditioning department? And that it's not always about strength. It's about kind of building an elite athlete. But how does that elite, you know, development transfer to the skills that we're looking for to develop on the field. So I think it's kind of hard to say, like, what is our overall arching philosophy? Do we have one? Yes, like our vision and mission and all that stuff. But in terms of autonomy, I think personally, if we go back to the first thing, is if we hire really good people who have the character, that education, and they're, when they have a free chance to get their head in the book, are they continuing to train themselves? Are they continuing to read and kind of do the things that they need? Then I don't want a bunch of robots on our staff who just follows the same program, kind of from top down. I want them to think, I want them to question, and I want them to question me and then be able to defend the program they've written, because they're going to have the best relationship with that athlete. They're going to have the context of the environment that they're trying to promote within that person. So from an autonomy, we give quite a bit of autonomy actually, but it starts to build like from that chemistry and from that trust that we've developed. And then through sharing of resources and information, next thing you know, like everyone's kind of thinking the same thing, but everyone's got the autonomy to like, hey, nothing's really off the table. Just defend why you're doing what you're doing with that particular player, so that if anybody has a question, then you can say, hey, what is the adaptation you were seeking? Why did you do that with this particular athlete? And kind of let's kind of talk through it a little bit. And I think Sid can explain that as well from the minor league system.
Yeah, kind of overarching, I think we're more following principles than specific methods. So I've certainly got my preferences on what currently I think is the best way to achieve, again, whether it's strength, power, speed, whatever it is we're trying to train. I've got my preferred ways for what I currently think is the best way to do that. But I also recognize that there's a lot of different ways to achieve that, right? There's a lot of different set rep schemes, a lot of different exercise selections that can make a guy stronger if that's what his goal is, to be better at baseball down the road. As long as organizationally and across our department we're operating following the same principles, there's a lot of different things you can do within that are going to be successful. So my goal, when not just hiring guys like Brad talked about, and good people that are good practitioners who are knowledgeable and can go and again have and thrive in that autonomy, is to have an overarching philosophy that gives them that room to do their thing and make the best decisions for the guys that are there at their affiliate at any given time. All right, and then it's my job over the top to make sure that our long-term plan, as we're going up and down levels, that the principles are consistent there, which to me is going to be, hey, what time of the year are we in? All right, what is our goal for this player? All right, what does our overall player development staff think is holding him back from being a big league player in his current state? And like, what is our role in developing that? Whether, again, it's guy needs to be faster, stronger, more mobile, whatever it is, my job is to make sure that that message is the same and that we're working towards that. But the actual, again, the day-to-day methods for how we're doing that should be coming from the guy who's on the bus with them, who's seeing them every single day, who knows whether a player had a tough night the day before, if he's kind of dragging or if he's feeling good, all that stuff. And I think it'd be very tough for me to try to write a plan from a distance that's going to be the best for every guy throughout the org at any given time. So as long as our principles are good and we are on the same page there, and there's a lot of different methods that are going to allow us to be successful. And we're looking for coaches that thrive in that kind of environment and find that sort of work really rewarding versus being handed something and just said, hey, coach this is what we do. All right. And what we do now, and my current thinking is probably going to change in a couple years if there's more evidence out there that's going to change that. And like Brad talked about, we not afraid to question each other respectfully. And at the end of the day, if someone has a question on your particular method, it forces you to have to actually verbalize and explain rationally like why you've selected this particular method of training, which ultimately, regardless of whether anyone else is changing their mind, for yourself, that's a good thing to have to verbalize and explain to people. And who knows, like there might be some things that you actually take from others as a result of having those open dialogues. But again, maybe this is different than with the traditional model, but we're more principle than specific method based, and our goal is to have a staff from top to bottom that thrives in that kind of environment and feels rewarded making those kind of choices on their own.
I think an exercise that we've done collectively as a staff as well is kind of like, what is your preparation, your strength conditioning philosophy? What is your coaching philosophy? Let's all present that to the staff. So now you have to have some of that internal reflection, and we can kind of help guide that person and see where they're coming from as they develop. It's a long-term development model for our athletes just as much as it is for our coaches. And we want our coaches to get, make it to the big leagues just as much as we want our athletes to make it to the big leagues. So if we kind of put a ceiling and a limit on them and just say, hey, follow this, then we're actually not allowing them to grow. And collectively, we're not getting the strength of the diversity of our staff. We've got a lot of smart guys that are working in, we've got one gentleman on staff who's getting his PhD. To not leverage that for the benefit of our staff and or the benefit of the athletes that we're working with in the organization would be, shame on us if we did that,
What does the system of checks and balances look like for you guys then, knowing that your coaches have some autonomy to program accordingly, and then say, maybe Brad, for you, like a guy's moving up and down between you and Howie in AAA, or then the lower levels, and Jordan, you're overseeing that as a coordinator. Like, how are you keeping, player moves kind of in line so that those guys are still following those programs or those certain things that they got from strength coach A when they arrive at strength coach B?
Yeah, I kind of start at the bottom here. We work our way up. So when we're together in spring training, during the times when we've got the entire org here, there does have to be some kind of overarching, hey, here's what we're doing, because trying to have this entire staff collectively agree on one thing for 100 players, like we'll just be here all day in the office talking about it. So there are times of the year where it makes sense for us to just, hey, here's our plan based on our current scenario in spring training with this quantity of people. And actually what ends up happening is when we're all together during that time, and again, you kind of see how your, for example, a starting pitcher's weekly routine shapes up between, hey, his bullpen is on this day. He's doing this style of lift on this day. He conditions aerobically on this day. He does sprints on this day. You kind of see the principles involved. Okay, here's why we have this on this day, and here's why it logistically makes sense for our current situation. Now, when you break camp and you go out into the season, I think what most people find is that, again, like if we're all following the same principles and understanding of what we're trying to accomplish here, it ends up being a pretty good template for most of your situations when you're out at your affiliates. Now, you do have those days that you're going to have to hang with them and, things happen and you're flexible. That's why we're all here full-time coaches. But I think most people can kind of agree on, okay, this makes a lot of sense to be doing total body lifts on this day of the week and this day of the week, or an upper lower split for a player who's in this situation with his bullpen on this day and his start day on this day. So kind of what ends up happening is, without me having to say, hey, this is the rule, this is the schedule that we follow regardless of your situation, is everyone will in a way kind of gravitate towards the same answer. There be maybe a little bit of variation on that, but again, following the same principles, we all kind of end up in roughly the same spot. Now, at the lower levels, that's much more structured in terms of, hey, players are being signed, you're going to be in the gym on this day and this day, because again, while the maturity is not there yet, we are essentially forcing them into developing, those habits like Brad mentioned that are going to serve them well when they're in the big leagues. And then as guys move up the level, to me, it's kind of a spectrum, how much autonomy they have and how much is kind of scheduled out for the athletes. So when a player is moving up or down a level from low A to high A, he already has the expectation of, oh, okay, if I'm at home for a series, I'm going to be coming into the weight room on one of these 2 days. And then the second time in the week, I'm going to be coming in on this day or this time. So there's really not a whole lot of change in routine there until you maybe get to the upper levels where guys start coming in from other organizations, free agent signings, and so on and so forth. And that's where I think, Howie has his work cut out for him, figuring out how you keep everyone on their routine, knowing that they're coming from a kind of a hodgepodge of backgrounds there. So there definitely is some continuity in terms of the expectations for what the players are going to do in a weekly layout throughout the season. Some of that is handed down, but some of that is just we're all kind of naturally arriving at the same destination, despite it not being required that we end up there, if that makes sense. And then in terms of a specific program, one of the things that we have to do if we're all, again, thinking for ourselves and writing programs for our guys at our affiliates, is we have to be open to seeing something through when a guy gets called up or sent to us that's coming from another coach. So for example, if a player is on their second week of what was supposed to be maybe 4 weeks on a particular choice of exercise or progression of load, and he gets called up halfway through that, it's the responsibility of the guy at the higher level who's receiving that player to, again, see that thing through. So we're not just zigzagging and not getting a solid 2, 3, 4 weeks in a row of that cumulative effective training. All right. Now, after that 3 or 4 weeks that you're getting, again, coming up to you, if you feel like, hey, based on our travel situation, our current spot here on the ground, I'm going to take this in a little bit different direction or modify this or this. Cool. Like that's what you're there to do. But we do avoid having a guy spent 2 weeks doing this, then he goes up and all of a sudden we're totally changing direction. Our principles are all aligned. We're trying to achieve the same thing. And in the event that there is something that, again, a coach personally that's not his preferred method, we're going to see that through because there's a lot of different things that are going to work. So our best results are going to come from consistency in one thing, even if it's not a particular individual's preferred exercise selection, for example.
Yeah, and I think at the major league level, going back and forth and working with Paul and AAA and having him, start off in spring training, and a lot of those guys end up starting the season with Paul and kind of going back and forth. It's just honestly, it's again, kind of running that same offense. Paul, how's this working for this particular guy? Hey, this is what plan we've on. This is where our thought process was. This is where he's responding. This is kind of what his playing schedule has been like. Here's what I found has worked really well. Send that program down. Like, let's communicate, figure out how things are going with him. Here's where I was planning on going with him, in that next phase. So when you get to the next phase, give me a buzz and we'll kind of work through some things on what we need to accomplish and, make sure that athlete is set up for success and there's continuity in the program, and vice versa. Guy gets called up, hey, where was he? What's he been doing? What's he like? What's his routine? Is there any supplements? Like, kind of what do we need to do to set this guy up for success? And so again, it comes down to like communication across the platform that we use for our strength and conditioning programs. And then just communication of like, hey, pick up the phone, simple email. Like, what are some of the things that we need to keep him on? What are some of the struggles that he may have had? Also, if a guy comes up, it's like, hey, Paul, like, what was the last week for you guys? Like, were you traveling? Were you on the road? Did you guys have some late nights, rain delays, whatnot? What is some of the context that I can expect for this guy to have outside of his life as well,
Chris, I think the linchpin in this entire thing is like your coach in AAA, because there's so many moves between AAA and the big leagues, and those are the moves that actually are affecting the games that count in the standings. So that guy is probably one of your most critical parts of the entire staff, and I think that in Paul and AAA, like, we've got probably the best AAA strength coach that you could ask for. And a lot of the things that unique situation requires, guys coming in, going up and down, some guys coming promoted from within the org, some guys coming from other teams, having a variety of backgrounds and experiences. Like, you got to have a really particular set of skills to thrive there, not socially, and then actual X's and O's coaching wise. And like, that's right in Paul's wheelhouse, and he crushes it. So during the year, Paul will get just as many phone calls from Brad as he will from me, because of the nature of that position. So I think that kind of holds everything together there between the two levels, is having someone in AAA that you trust and who, again, can take that unique situation and thrive in it. And we're really lucky that we've got Howie in that spot where he crushes that for us.
Yeah, we were just texting the other day, actually. He's awesome. That, when I was in AAA in 19, he and I spoke, and we've done the podcast together and everything. He's really rock solid, and I would agree 100% that AAA spot is so important because it is your extension of your major league team. And so it's like, you have to be on the same page with your major league coach. And that's kind of how I was when I was there. Is like, I found I was speaking with the major league coaches almost more than the coordinator, just because of all the moves that were going on and just keeping them on the same page with those guys. And, now our AAA guy is my best friend in our organization. We're very close, and like, it helps me with him, where if a guy comes up and I'm like, I need a little more detail about this guy, like, I can just call him anytime or text him, and like, we're very open with each other. We talk all the time in the off season. So even that relationship between, Major League staff AAA coach, like in the off season, and just being familiar with each other, I think really does go a long way in making that Major League program run so smoothly.
Yeah, I agree. I think also too, like, we've been fortunate to have Paul in that role, and even Sid's been in the role for 5 years now within our organization. So as the consistency of the organization taking care and supporting strength and conditioning goes a long way, because now you're not having the staff turnover consistently. You're actually having the staff, there, everyone gels, everyone comes together, and now that everyone becomes an extension of each other. And really it takes so much time to develop those systems in place and kind of that language and the commonalities, like you said, Sid had mentioned, we're all operating off of the same principles and we'll probably arrive to very similar conclusions, but it takes a long time for that to happen. As a team on the field's got to gel over the course of a season. The performance team and the strength and conditioning team and the medical staff, everyone needs to gel over the course of their time with the organization. Is just as important.
I agree 100% with all of that. And kind of just expanding on that a little bit is, how are you going about keeping your strength and conditioning staff engaged? Whether it's, during the season, we talked about sometimes we lose contact with each other, or just off-season continuing ed. Like, what are you guys doing to build that trust and that, communication and that just comfort of being around each other?
I think you mentioned a point, it starts in spring training. It's really the one time that we're all together. And that's really like just the hours in the trenches really helps to bring us together. But then, like you said, it's going to get spending some individual time with guys, if I can, trying to get dinner with each coach over the course of spring training, or even if it's just like, hey, let's go toss the aerobia around, or hey, we're all going out and playing some fungo golf or whatnot. Like, these are some of the things that help kind of bring discussion together. And then from a continuing education standpoint, over the last couple of years, we have put together, bi-week or twice a week, we'll do individual like Teams call or Zoom. I think that's one thing that from COVID, I think we leveraged COVID well as a staff, and was able to grow collectively. Both one of the days is more focused on like, what is our individual strengths and weaknesses as a coach that we're looking at? Like I had mentioned earlier, what is your strength and conditioning philosophy? What is your coaching philosophy? How do you lead? Like some of those aspects from a coach development. And then we'll look at it more from a universal development, how we as a department growing. And so by focusing on those two areas, specific areas over the course of time during the off season, that helps us come together. And I think it's really important to have the decompression time afterwards, where we don't really talk much, and that's okay. Everyone kind of has to decompress. But then as we start to ramp up for the season, getting into December, getting into January, okay, now let's start to put those things on the table. And we also would come together for a in-person strength conditioning and medical. Like there's the athletic trainers have their side of things, and maybe a specialized focus that they're looking at from a con ed standpoint. We have more of a strength conditioning focus. And then there's also, what is there a way that we can all collectively take a strength, like a course that helps bridge that gap and open lines of communication that helps with return to play progresses and whatnot.
Yeah, we, in normal years, before travel became as tough of a proposition, it's, certain times of the year, like Brad mentioned, having that in-person seminar, usually, kind of in the middle of the off season, middle of the winter, in Atlanta, where we're getting all the medical staff, all the strength staff there in one place. And that's great because, again, if we're following the same principles, it makes sense for us to be getting some similar sources of continuing education in there. But also just as important to that is seeing all the boys in January when you haven't seen them since maybe spring training the year before with everyone in person, and guys just spending, a couple days together. Yeah, we're taking this course, but just seeing all your guys that you haven't seen in a while. I think we got a lot out of that staff development wise, and maybe the last 2 years that hasn't been as readily available, given flights and travel being a little tougher. But we tried to do the same thing, remotely and virtually, where again, we're getting the group together a couple times a week to, whether that's bringing in someone to educate us on a subject that we think is going to be relevant, like force plates, or that's stuff that within our staff, we're having guys, dive into a topic and bring back some discussion points for the group to hash out. I think it's good. We got our space away from each other to go and decompress and get away. But I think if you've got the right mix of people, there should be a time where you're just you're ready to see your guys again. You're ready to be together with the staff. And whether that's virtual or in person in the middle of the winter, we try to take advantage of those times when we can.
That's kind of the time we're at right now, right? Is like we're getting close to spring training and, we're getting ready to ramp up. And I'm like on Zoom calls with all of the other guys and texting in the group and like sending them stupid things. I can't wait to see you guys. That's kind of how I feel right now as we're talking about this. So it's cool that you guys are getting on calls together and when it's applicable, like getting in-person stuff. And I couldn't agree more, Jordan. Just seeing those guys in January after not seeing them for a while, for me, it's like, it's really awesome. Even like just working at camp where some of the players come in and you haven't seen them and you're like, dude, you look great. You must've been killing it this off season. Like, I think that stuff goes a long way too, like in season, just having continuity and having some trust in the other members of your staff.
Yeah, definitely.
So, okay. So obviously you guys won this year, ultimate prize. Everybody's going to be kind of, chasing you guys this year as the defending champions. What are you guys working on as a staff, or maybe completely changing, getting rid of, from last year for the upcoming 2022 season?
I think, one of the things we continue to take a deep dive in is to force plates, and how do we leverage those, where we're now starting to use them throughout our minor league level. And so it's a little bit of an onboarding for the new coaches that we had, and also for our minor league coaches that had a small snippet of access to them over spring training last year, but now, we're going to have them in AAA and AA. And so are we up to speed with what those guys are going to be doing? And let's get really good at like a few things versus always trying to add and add and add. It's kind of like, how do we redline a Toyota Camry before we start going and getting a bunch of Ferraris for the sake of it?
Yeah, we've definitely added over the years, and we're in a great spot where we've got a lot of resources to go get whatever we think we need to help these guys be better. But I echo what Brad said about trying to be really good at one thing before you move on to the next. So, we've got force plates, we've got gym aware, we've got a variety of things. Our challenge moving forward is maybe to not continue to add, but to figure out how to use those things better. And for me, on the kind of more minor league development side, that's what do our coordinators, what do our baseball coaches, like what do they think are the ways that we can help their guys on an individual level? Whether, again, it's having range of motion values for them if they want a question on what a guy is and is not able to do on the skill side of things, or measurements of output, or whatever it is, like what do they need to know, like that we can help with? And like, do we have a way that we can measure that and be objective about it and have really good, useful information that we're going to use? I don't want to be in a spot where we test absolutely everything and who knows whether it's going to be worth anything, because I think that puts a lot of strain on your coaches to just be out there collecting stuff all the time. So we're trying to refine and figure out like what's going to be most important for us. Okay, when we're confident about that, like let's be really, really good at those things and not spread ourselves too thin. So I don't know that we've necessarily maybe added anything new this year as much as we're trying to take the things we already have and be better from them. So we've got force plates. It's not the be all end all. We're not like a force plate based organization. We're trying to figure out how those things are going to work for us the best way we can and how we can just continue to refine making that work for us.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think sometimes in baseball, there's like the new shiny thing and it's like, all right, we need that. And sometimes really it's just refining what you already have and just being really good at the things that have already made you really good. So I can definitely appreciate that. The last thing I want to talk about before I send you guys off is the playoffs as a whole. I didn't send this in the note sheet, but I would be missing a major point here to not talk about the playoffs. And we were talking about it briefly before we recorded. So Brad, I want your perspective from like actually being in October. And then Jordan, I want your perspective of like being the coordinator, seeing some of those guys that have moved through your system. And then like if you were able to attend any of the games, like how it was to see it, from the seats as opposed to like inside the dugout.
Yeah, I mean, obviously playoffs are what everyone is chasing, and it's a whole different level of there's a level of stress that, everything is elevated, everything is magnified. Um, and so how do you continue to manage that stress overall? Personally, how do you be the same guy every day as a coach and make sure that you're ready to go and that we're tightened and buttoned up as the strength and conditioning staff? How do we make sure that the guys have what they need to be successful, regardless of the outcome of the previous night? It's kind of relying on the systems that got you there and continuing to provide just as much confidence of like, hey, you know what? Yesterday was yesterday. If you had a loss, let's move on. What do you need from us today? And how do we continue to kind of make sure that guys are peaking at and feeling really good at that moment in time? Um, the playoffs are also, I feel like 1 month of playoffs is like 3 months of a regular season. You've got long days like we all have, and the emotional roller coaster that the game provides during that time period is like nothing you've ever been on before, um, so yeah, there's a lot of things that you're making sure you're ready to go and make in order to make sure that the guys are ready to go, and that's the important part. And working closely with Paul and in AAA and like who's going to be ready and like how do we keep those guys going? There's such a mental aspect of it, to peaking and keeping those guys that, hey, this guy may get the call, he may not get the call. How are we going to kind of battle that? Is a really important thing. So that communication and hats off, obviously Paul Howie's done a hell of a job for us, and that communication is key because those guys came up and they were really key pieces of our success, and that's a testament to them, and it's a testament to Paul, for keeping them going as well.
Yeah, and then from my point of view, the last 2 years have been really unique, and alternate sites, and 2020 season being abbreviated, and then this year, the minor league schedule was different than normal, and again, Brad mentioned we had guys come up in really key spots that a week before that spot came up, like no one would have guessed that they'd be again starting this game or coming out of the bullpen in this situation, and I think it just goes to show, like, you never know when any of these guys that you're working with, no matter how far removed they might seem from being a big league contributor, like you have to, again, stay the course and make sure that you can't, I don't know that you can win a game in August with what you're doing there, but you might be able to lose games there because you're not continuing to follow your routine and stay ready in the event that you're needed at the most important time of the year. So the last 2 years for me, seeing some of these guys maybe from the stands or watching on TV, not being in the dugout, sitting next to someone like who has no idea like with this particular player where he was at a week ago. They just know that he's out there like in a crucial situation, but being able to know like, man, like all the work that went into him being there, and not just from like the actual X's and O's playing baseball, but just from like mentally staying prepared throughout, really adverse situations of, again, AAA season, alternate sites, taxi squads, and all these different things that affect guys being ready to go. Really cool to see them again in the most important times of the year and knowing all the work that went in behind the scenes for them to be ready for that spot.
For sure. And yeah,
But also,
go ahead. No, go ahead, Brad. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say too, I also have to thank, Jordan Wolf, the major league assistant during that time period. Like he's just as a huge important part of this entire operation as well, in communicating with Paul and kind of like it, when we talk about having a support, like he's unbelievable. So I don't want to leave him out of here because he is a big part of our championship run and is so helpful for us during every playoff run that we've had. So those two guys, I mean, our entire staff, but he puts in a ton of work for us and is a hell of a coach. So he's a major part of our success at the major league level as well.
Yeah, it takes a whole team, right, to do it. And that's, I was to say, is like, I was in the playoffs this year as a coach in the dugout in 2018 when we went to the World Series. We came, as fans, and we sat in the center field seats and all that. And like, just seeing some of those guys and having known their path, I can relate to what you're saying, Jordan. It's like I see them out there in the World Series, and like I had, they were in Double-A not that long before that. And then this year being my first year in the big leagues, like being able to experience the playoffs firsthand, like going to what you're saying, Brad, that the emotional roller coaster is just like nothing. And then like that, we played the Yankees in the wild card game, and I can very specifically remember like being out with the pitchers during throwing program, and some of them are like, you know, the older guys like, hey man, just another day, like we're just going to prepare, and what happens happens. And I was like, I don't know if I feel that way. Like I myself am feeling, you know, there's a ton of cameras and the media and just, you know, that rivalry situation in that game. So obviously we came up short of the ultimate goal, but that extra step, even that World Series, the pressure and all the media and all the noise and all that, I'm sure was just absolutely crazy to experience.
Yeah, it was interesting when when we got to Houston and you know, come out of the dugout and you're like, man, like the entire warning track is filled with media, and you're climbing through people and you're trying to, you know, do stretch, and just, you realize kind of the magnitude of the situation and the microscope that you're under. So it's, you know, it's kind of, at first you're like, holy hell, like all right, this is what it's like, you know, but then, you know, you just kind of say, okay, here's how we're going to do it. And how do you protect the players during that time as well? You know, where you set up and kind of like, so that they can do their work, because everyone has a job to do, whether it's the media, you know, the players, they're trying to get their extra work in. So how do you keep the players in a safe space and navigate that in order to get everybody in a place to be successful, and for them to be themselves and kind of relax a little bit as well?
Yeah, it was really overwhelming to walk out and just like, there's an absurd amount of media that you have to navigate through. And you're like, I really would like to get the stretch, please. Like this, you know, 100 cameras and everything. So I can only imagine that next series of the World Series, how crazy it was. But guys, I really appreciate you coming on and just opening up. And again, congrats on an awesome run this year. And, you know, good luck for this upcoming 2022 season. And we'll talk soon.
Well, thank you very much for having us. Appreciate it. Good luck to you guys as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, that concludes this episode with Brad and Jordan. I hope you enjoyed this one. Personally, I thought this was a really fun, really cool episode to be able to do, and maybe it's something that I'll probably do every year after the World Series, is just have the winning staff or at least some members of the winning staff come on and just talk philosophy and staff continuity and things like that. So I hope you enjoyed this one, and like I said, I think for me personally, it was a really fun one to do. 3 things that I took from the guys in this episode: try to be the same coach every day regardless of yesterday's results. Learn to appreciate the value of decompression time, and a quality staff will have good character people who have open communication, high levels of trust, and a willingness to question current practices. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll talk to you again on the next one.